4 decades.
Almost everywhere, history has relegated royals to the role of decorative spectators. But in Spain, as the old dictator General Franco faded away, he gave the House of Bourbon one last chance to captain a ship of state.
El príncipe don Juan Carlos de Borbón y Borbón, que suspende la sesión que se reanudará a las 19 horas del día de mañana.
¡Viva el rey! ¡Viva! ¡Viva España! ¡Viva!
Juan Carlos became the custodian of Spain's transition back to democracy. And it was a fleeting role because once parliamentary institutions were restored, his powers were soon clipped. But it wasn't a free ride. Colonel Tejero of the Guardia Civil tried to mount a coup. And against this blatant adventurism, as well as a host of other challenges, the king stood fast.
I wasn't afraid for Spain because I knew what the rest and what the whole majority of the armed forces and the people in general wanted and really needed for me to do that night.
And having served his purpose, Juan Carlos settled back into the more usual royal routine, attending royal weddings, visiting the sick and presiding over state occasions. His popularity held out for many years. People even forgave the reported affairs. But it was austerity that did for him.
I think he's tired psychologically. He has been trying to improve his image and he hasn't succeeded, so he's just giving up. Simple as that.
There aren't many leaders for whom an elephant in the room becomes their literal nemesis. But photos of Juan Carlos hunting big game may have given the death wound to his reign. Not only had he been telling reporters how he felt the pain of Spain's unemployed, but he's also championed wildlife conservation.
So a reign that began in 1975 with such constitutional and political importance ends in a series of tawdry tabloid scandals. Spain faces all manner of crises now, not least getting the procedure right for his son to take over.
Today, Juan Carlos told his nation that he would hand power to his son, who the House of Bourbon trusts will find it easier to play the part of austerity monarch.
Today a new generation must lead. Younger people with more energy, determined to push through with the reforms we need and to face our future challenges. I've only ever wanted to contribute to the welfare of ordinary Spaniards. I want the best for this country.
He's a man who's in his mid-40s, he's fresh, he's someone untainted by the scandals affecting his family. But at the same time, he's someone that is not that well known. He hasn't been under the spotlight that often. Let's say he has a potential to become very popular, but in a way, it's still an enigma. And the worst of all for him is that he will be facing the country at a moment of huge crisis of different sorts, economic, political, constitutional. And, well, it's a challenge that is really, really difficult.
While Juan Carlos had become unpopular here, there's no overwhelming desire for a republic. The House of Bourbon will get one more chance at reinvention at a time of fresh crisis when people might just warm to a new king.
Well, with us now is the Spanish Civil War historian, Professor Paul Preston, and the author of it. You wrote a book about Juan Carlos, didn't you?
I did.
Indeed.
Guilty as charged.
The text on the subject.
So he says.
How important a figure do you think history will judge him to be?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, there really aren't words to describe how, in retrospect, he will be seen. Now, I don't want to say that he made democracy, because he didn't. The pressure for democracy came from the Spanish people. But what he did in terms of neutralising the army in the course of 1976 to make it possible for there to be the transactions and the negotiations that brought about what was actually quite a limited transition in the first instance, that was immensely courageous. And then after the first elections, in 1977, over the next 4 years, he acted as sort of fireman of democracy. And until which we've just seen, the defeat of the coup in 1981, I mean, he was absolutely the key man. And I think it's fair to say that without him, there would have very likely been bloodshed. So despite the errors, despite, if you like, the ending of a glorious reign, I think history will treat him very benevolently.
But you look at the pictures of protests against him in Spain, and clearly a lot of people have forgotten that.
Well, there's a couple of issues here. I mean, first of all, there's a generational thing. A lot of people who were born in, 35-year-olds were born when he was already king. And if you look at the polls, the support amongst people who are 35 and below for the monarchy is around about the 40% mark, as against the 65% mark more generally. And we need to remember that 5 years ago, it was in the 80s. So obviously there's been a fall. The problem is that the king, as, if you like, the pinnacle of the political system, has, in the first instance, was, if you like, splashed by the mud that was going on because of the massive discontent as a result of the economic crisis. It then hit him personally. I mean, the biggest thing behind the demos, which are not directly against the king by any means, or the monarchy, they're against the political system. But the political system is riddled with corruption, right from the municipal level right up to the top. In that sense, the king was associated with it. But once it hit him personally, or once it hit his family personally, once investigations started into his son-in-law, then that hit him. Now that's since combined with a general weariness on his part, and of course the issue, I mean, there have been issues about the German princess, about the elephant hunting and so on and so forth.
Yeah, come on, that's personal.
It's personal, but in Spain, it's very odd. There was a point in Mark's report where he referred to some, that he managed to get over the fact of the many affairs. The Spaniards are worse than the French in this regard, or better than the French, if you like, whichever way you want to put it. They didn't give a damn about the sexual life of their male leaders. But the sense that money was being wasted, or money changing hands in a corrupt manner, which obviously has to be proved, but nonetheless the generalised feeling that was the case, that's what's caused part of the problem.
What do you think we should reappraise Franco for the fact that he chose this man quite cleverly? By your account, he did a great job in the transition to democracy. Yeah. Franco chose him for that job.
No, absolutely not. Franco chose him and trained him. I mean, effectively, Juan Carlos was kidnapped aged 10 and taken to Spain to be trained in a function. Now, in the meanwhile, Franco actually played with various royal candidates. There were 6, in fact, and he chose Juan Carlos in part in order to humiliate the legitimate king, who was Juan Carlos's father. So that was the first dirty trick that Franco did. But the second thing was that Franco trained Juan Carlos in order to maintain the dictatorship. One of the things that's truly remarkable and courageous about Juan Carlos is that he actually betrayed Franco. He betrayed the oaths that now technically he didn't. I mean, there was an immensely clever arrangement whereby very, very, very clever constitutional lawyers, if you like, worked out ways to wriggle through Franco's constitutional arrangements that thereby made it possible for him to seem to fulfill the oaths that he'd taken, but he did absolutely what Franco did not want him to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you.